What happens when Hollywood's most composed star collides with daytime television's most unfiltered host? The answer: sparks fly, voices rise, and an entire audience is left stunned in disbelief. Tonight, we dive into the shocking clash between Ryan Gosling and Sara Haines on The View, a confrontation so raw, so unrestrained, that it felt less like a talk show and more like a cinematic showdown played out in real time. The stage was set on a Tuesday morning, sunlight filtering through the wide studio windows, illuminating the glossy wooden table where the hosts of The View had gathered. The audience was buzzing, electric, whispering about today's guest. Ryan Gosling, charming, polished, and endlessly composed, was here to talk about his new film. But beneath the smiles and the anticipation, no one knew that the interview would soon veer into territory darker and sharper than any scripted performance. Ryan entered with the quiet confidence that had made him a Hollywood icon. The applause was thunderous, and his slight, humble smile seemed to charm the room effortlessly. Yet Sara Haines, perched on her chair, eyes locked onto him with an intensity that didn't quite match the usual morning banter. From the start, something in her energy felt different. The way she leaned forward, her lips pressing into a thin line, signaled that this wasn't going to be the kind of breezy celebrity conversation viewers were used to. "Ryan," she began, her tone deceptively light, "you're here to talk about your film, but I want to cut right to something that's been circulating online. People say you've created this carefully curated image. This idea of Ryan Gosling, the perfect gentleman, the untouchable Hollywood star. But is it real? Or are we all just buying into a performance you've been selling for years?" The audience gasped. The words hung heavy in the air. Ryan blinked, caught off guard, his posture stiffening ever so slightly. This wasn't the expected warm welcome, not the promotional tour script he'd prepared himself to deliver. He gave a small chuckle, though the humor didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Sara," he replied slowly, "I think anyone in this business is aware that there's a level of perception, sure. But I've never tried to present myself as perfect. I'm just doing my work, telling stories, and living my life as authentically as I can." But Sara wasn't finished. Her voice sharpened, each word landing like a stone on glass. "Authentically? Really? Because some critics argue your roles, your interviews, even your appearances here. Everything feels calculated. People want to know who the real Ryan Gosling is, not the Hollywood illusion." The tension in the room thickened. Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably in her chair, throwing a side glance at Joy Behar, as though silently asking whether Sara was pushing too far. The audience, meanwhile, leaned in closer, the silence punctuated by small murmurs. Ryan's jaw tightened. He leaned forward now, no longer the passive guest, but a man unwilling to let his identity be stripped away. His voice was steady but edged with steel. "Sara, I don't think it's fair to dismiss my life or my work as an illusion. I've worked hard, and yes, people see what they want to see. But I don't owe anyone a performance of my private self." The clash had begun. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it simmered like heat under a closed lid. You could sense the storm brewing, the inevitable eruption that was coming. Sara crossed her arms, her expression unrelenting, and for a moment, it seemed as if she was daring him to break. Joy tried to interject, her voice light-hearted in an attempt to defuse the rising tension. "Well, Ryan, I don't think anyone here minds the image. Most of us love it." The audience laughed nervously, but the laughter quickly died when Sara snapped back, her voice slicing through the room. "See, that's the problem. We don't hold men accountable the way we should. We let them coast on charm, on image, while women in this business get picked apart and scrutinized for every flaw. Isn't it time we stop letting Hollywood's golden boys skate by without questioning what's beneath the surface?" The words struck with the force of an accusation. Ryan's eyes darkened, his breathing measured. He wasn't used to this, interviews turning into interrogations, his presence framed not as admiration, but as suspicion. He looked directly at Sara now, no longer dodging, no longer softening his replies. "You want accountability? Fine," he said, his voice low but resonant, carrying across the studio. "But accountability doesn't mean tearing someone down just because they don't fit the narrative you want. I respect scrutiny, but I won't sit here and let you decide who I am." The audience broke into spontaneous applause, some cheering, others gasping at the boldness of his retort. Sara's lips curled into a faint, almost victorious smile, as though she had been waiting for him to snap. And just like that, the tension was no longer simmering, it was blazing, impossible to ignore. The air in the studio shifted, the hosts sitting on the edge of their seats, each wondering how far this clash would go. Would it remain verbal sparring, or would the confrontation escalate into something unforgettable? The clash of Ryan Gosling and Sara Haines was no longer about a movie or an image. It had become a battle over perception, truth, and the hidden power dynamics that play out in front of millions of viewers. And as the cameras kept rolling, the audience held their breath, knowing they were watching a moment of television history unfold. The question now was not whether Ryan could defend himself, but how far Sara was willing to push. And she wasn't done yet. The studio lights burned brighter now, as though amplifying the heat of the moment. The audience sat in restless silence, shifting in their seats, sensing that the morning talk show had transformed into something volatile and unpredictable. Sara Haines leaned back slightly, but the intensity in her eyes hadn't dimmed. Her tone, sharp as a knife edge, sliced through the air as she spoke again. Ryan, people don't come here just to hear about a movie. They come here for honesty. And I think what frustrates a lot of viewers is that your whole career has been polished, curated, and, let's be honest, protected. You don't give us the cracks. You don't give us the mess. Isn't that what being real is supposed to be? The audience let out a low murmur, torn between shock and anticipation. It wasn't often that a guest, especially a Hollywood A-lister, was pressed this aggressively on The View. Ryan sat still, his expression unreadable, though a faint pulse flickered at his temple. He placed both hands on the table, steady, as if grounding himself against the weight of the moment. He exhaled slowly before responding. Sara, with all due respect, you're asking me to turn myself into entertainment. My personal life, my flaws, my pain, that doesn't belong to the public. I give my honesty through my work, through my performances. That's where I put the mess. That's where I put the cracks. The words hung heavy, almost poetic, but Sara wasn't swayed. She leaned forward again, narrowing the space between them, her voice rising. That's convenient, isn't it? You get to hide behind your roles. You get to package your emotions in a script, in a character, and the world applauds. But the real Ryan Gosling? He never has to be vulnerable in the spotlight. Women don't get that luxury, Ryan. We're torn apart for every mistake, every wrinkle, every crack in the image. You get celebrated for being mysterious. Gasps rippled through the audience, and one or two even clapped in agreement, their hands hesitant but audible. Joy Behar threw her hands up, exclaiming half-jokingly, "Oh boy, here we go. I knew this coffee was too strong today." The studio laughed nervously, a brief attempt to cut the tension, but the clash had already spiraled beyond humor. Ryan turned his head slightly, his eyes locking with Sara's, and the warmth that usually defined him was gone. His voice, calm but firm, carried a gravity that pulled every ear in the room. Sara, you don't know me. You don't know what I've been through, what I've chosen not to share, and why. To suggest that my life is some kind of shielded fairy tale is unfair and frankly insulting. Just because I don't parade my pain for the cameras doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The audience erupted in applause, louder this time, some even cheering. A few stood briefly before sitting back down, realizing the gravity of what they were witnessing. Sara's expression faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered, her smile tight, almost defiant. "Then why not prove it?" she fired back, her voice echoing against the set. "Why not show people who you really are instead of hiding behind the Hollywood gloss? Are you afraid they won't like what they see?" It was the sharpest blow yet, a direct strike at his identity, his humanity. Whoopi, sitting between them, finally interjected, her tone controlled but tinged with warning. "All right, let's just take a breath here. This isn't a courtroom, it's a conversation. Sara, I think Ryan's made it clear where he stands, and Ryan, we appreciate the honesty. Let's not turn this into a cage match." The audience chuckled lightly, but the tension was too thick to be diffused. Ryan's jaw tightened again, his shoulders squaring as he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a lower register, deliberate and unwavering. "Sara, I've spent my career trying to protect the people I love from this kind of circus. My partner, my kids, they don't deserve to be dissected just because I'm an actor. If that makes me guarded, then so be it. But don't mistake boundaries for dishonesty." The audience roared in approval, a wave of applause washing over him. But Sara wasn't ready to yield. She smiled, almost serenely, before replying, "Boundaries are one thing. But when boundaries become walls, they stop being about protection. They start being about control. And maybe people deserve to question that, Ryan." Her words drew out a collective gasp, the audience reacting as if the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Joy shook her head, muttering under her breath, She's not letting go of this bone. Sunny Hostin, seated beside Sara, shifted uncomfortably, her legal background making her acutely aware of how combative the exchange had become. Ryan's eyes narrowed. The mask of composure was slipping, and the audience could sense it. For a moment, silence filled the room, thick and unyielding. Then he spoke, his voice cutting through the air like glass breaking. You talk about accountability, Sara. Let's talk about yours. Do you think tearing people down on live television, painting them as frauds, is accountability? Or is it just cruelty disguised as journalism? The audience erupted, some gasping, some cheering, others clapping wildly at the audacity of his rebuttal. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, her eyes wide, as if even she hadn't anticipated the sharpness of his counterattack. Sara's smile vanished. Her composure cracked for the first time. That's not what this is, she said, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to steady it. This is about truth. And sometimes truth isn't pretty. Ryan leaned in, his eyes blazing with an intensity that no script could capture. Then maybe the truth is this. You don't want honesty. You want spectacle. You want to poke and prod until someone breaks, so you can call it journalism. But that's not truth, Sara. That's exploitation. The audience roared again, the energy now chaotic, divided, as though the entire studio had split into two camps. Some shouted Ryan's name, others booed at Sara, the noise swelling into a storm that producers behind the cameras were scrambling to manage. Joy clutched her mug like it was the only anchor in the storm. Well, this is officially more entertaining than my morning crossword, she quipped, but even her humor couldn't mask the fire consuming the set. The clash had reached a fever pitch. The hosts exchanged nervous glances, the audience hung on every syllable, and Ryan and Sara sat locked in a battle of wills, neither backing down, neither willing to concede. And in that moment, as cameras captured every flicker of anger, every tremor of emotion, the question lingered in the air. Who would break first? The storm wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The silence that followed Ryan's last words wasn't empty. It was charged, alive, almost vibrating through the studio. Every pair of eyes in the audience was wide, glued to the stage, waiting for what would happen next. This wasn't just television anymore. It was something raw, unscripted, and dangerously real. The clash between Ryan Gosling and Sara Haines had ripped away the veil of morning show politeness, and now, the storm was uncontainable. Sara sat there, her fingers curled tightly around her coffee mug, the white knuckles betraying the calm expression she was fighting to hold. She blinked once, twice, as though steadying herself against the weight of Ryan's accusations. But when she spoke again, her voice wasn't shaken. It was sharper, colder, like a blade being unsheathed. You call this exploitation, Ryan? Let me tell you something. This show has been around for over 25 years. We ask the tough questions. We don't bow to Hollywood royalty just because they walk in with a smile. If you think being pressed for honesty is exploitation, maybe you're the one who's been living in an illusion. The audience gasped again, some clapping in bursts of support, others booing softly. The tension split the room right down the middle. Half wanted to shield Ryan, their golden boy, the man who had carried entire movies with his quiet vulnerability. The other half, swayed by Sara's fire, nodded in agreement, as if she were slicing open the facade of celebrity culture right in front of them. Ryan leaned forward now, no longer the calm guest he had been when the show began. His voice was low, but it carried across the set like rolling thunder. Sara, you keep talking about illusions, about honesty, about tearing down walls. But here's the truth. You don't want honesty. You want drama. You want a headline. You're not trying to get to the truth. You're trying to break me in front of millions of people. That's not journalism. That's theater. And I didn't come here to audition for your spectacle. The words hit like a hammer. The audience erupted, cheers, whistles, applause so loud it drowned out the nervous shuffling of producers behind the cameras. Whoopi Goldberg placed a hand on her forehead, muttering under her breath, "Lord have mercy," while Joy Behar stared, wide-eyed, realizing the segment had officially spun out of anyone's control. But Sara wasn't backing down. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a smile that looked more like defiance than amusement. You think I need you to break, Ryan? You've already shown the cracks. The moment you walked in here, smiling for the cameras, you thought you could charm your way through this. But look at you now, you're angry, defensive. That's the real you. And maybe people at home need to see that. The audience roared in mixed reaction, some clapping, some booing, some shouting incoherently, the noise becoming a living, breathing thing that surged through the studio. Ryan's eyes flashed with something dangerous, something rarely seen from him. He leaned even closer, his voice tight, simmering with controlled fury. No, Sara. This isn't the real me. This is me standing up to someone who's decided that my humanity is a game. You want cracks? You want vulnerability? Here it is, I'm tired. I'm tired of being dissected, analyzed, told that I'm either too polished or too private. I've worked my whole life to be here, and I won't apologize for protecting myself and my family. The studio fell silent for just a moment, as though the words had knocked the wind out of everyone. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was raw, frayed, like the edges of something that had been hidden for too long. The audience shifted, many nodding, many clapping again, this time not with ferocity, but with respect. But Sara, relentless, refused to soften. She shook her head slowly, her voice cutting through the moment like glass. And yet you chose to sit in that chair. You chose to come here. You chose to sell your story, your film, your image. Don't act like you're a victim now. If you want the spotlight, you take the scrutiny with it. That's the deal. The words landed like a slap, and the audience reacted instantly, loud gasps, shocked exclamations. A woman in the front row even stood up briefly, waving her hand toward the stage. That's not fair, she shouted before sitting back down, her face flushed with outrage. Ryan closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through his nose, gathering himself. When he opened them, his stare was fixed, burning into Sara's like a man unwilling to retreat. His voice was quieter now, but every syllable was sharp, deliberate. You think you're the truth teller here, Sara. But you're not. You're playing a part, just like anyone else on this stage. The difference is, I don't confuse my role with who I really am. Can you say the same? The room erupted. The audience screamed, clapped, booed. It was chaos. Whoopi slapped the table and shouted, all right, enough! But her voice was swallowed by the storm. The clash was no longer just a verbal sparring match. It was a collision of identities, of philosophies, of raw human pride. Sara's face flushed red, her composure cracking for the first time. Her voice rose above the audience noise, fierce, almost trembling with emotion. I can absolutely say the same. I don't hide behind characters. I don't get paid to pretend. I sit here every day and I speak my truth, unfiltered, unpolished. That's what real honesty looks like, Ryan. Not this carefully packaged image you've built. Ryan leaned back slightly, his chest rising and falling, his fists clenched on the table. He laughed, but it wasn't his usual charming laugh. It was bitter, jagged, almost dangerous. Unfiltered truth? Or unchecked arrogance? Because what you call honesty looks a lot like hostility from where I'm sitting. Maybe the reason you're so desperate to expose me is because it distracts from your own insecurities. The words cut deep. The audience screamed again, some gasping, others shouting, some clapping wildly, as though they were witnessing a heavyweight fight. The set itself seemed to vibrate under the force of the moment. Joy Behar muttered, "Oh my God," while Sunny Hostin pressed her lips together, refusing to step into the fire. Sara shot forward in her chair, her voice trembling but louder than ever. Don't you dare turn this on me. Don't you dare. I'm not the one hiding behind a script. I'm not the one terrified of letting people see who I really am. You're not the victim here, Ryan. You're the illusion. The words echoed in the studio like a gunshot. The audience screamed again, the noise reaching a fever pitch. Some booed her, others cheered, the sound so overwhelming that the producers behind the cameras gestured frantically, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the chaos unfold. Ryan's face hardened, his voice low, final, unyielding. No, Sara. The illusion is thinking that cruelty equals honesty. And maybe the world's finally seeing that for themselves. The audience exploded, cheers, claps, whistles, shouts. It was bedlam. Whoopi stood up from her chair, slamming her hand on the table. Okay, enough. We're going to break, right now. We'll be back. The cameras zoomed out as the chaos continued, Ryan staring, unwavering, Sara fuming, the audience in uproar. The producers scrambled, the studio buzzed like a hive struck by a stone, and millions at home leaned forward on their couches, stunned, exhilarated, unsettled. Because what they had just witnessed wasn't an interview. It was a war. And it wasn't over yet. The screen faded to black for a commercial break, but inside the studio, the chaos didn't stop. Audience members leaned across aisles, whispering, arguing, even shouting. Some stood to their feet, fuming at Sara for what they saw as an attack, while others passionately defended her, saying she had only spoken the truth that too many were afraid to voice. On stage, Ryan Gosling remained still, his posture rigid, his eyes locked somewhere just beyond the cameras. His jaw was tight, his hands clasped, as though holding in the storm that still boiled inside him. Sara, by contrast, sat forward in her chair, flushed and restless, her fingers tapping rapidly against the coffee mug she hadn't touched in minutes. Between them, the tension was so thick it felt like a second presence, invisible yet suffocating. The other hosts exchanged nervous glances. Whoopi Goldberg, usually unshakable, rubbed her temples as if trying to stave off a migraine. Joy Behar sighed, muttering, "This is worse than Thanksgiving with my in-laws," while Sunny Hostin scrolled through her phone with urgency, already anticipating the wildfire of headlines that would erupt before the hour was over. When the cameras flicked back on, the audience's noise didn't fade, it roared. Applause, boos, shouts, cheers. It all blended into a single storm of noise. The producers had tried to calm them, but the energy in the studio had grown too feral, too unruly. Whoopi's voice cut through it, calm but commanding. "All right, folks, let's bring it back down. We're live, so let's all take a breath." But the moment she tried to move the segment forward, Sara struck again. Her voice was sharp, unwavering. "No, Whoopi. We're not moving past this. Because what happened here matters. It's easy to applaud when someone hides behind polished answers. It's harder to sit in the discomfort of truth. Ryan doesn't want to face that, but I think people at home see it clearly." Gasps filled the room. The words felt less like a statement and more like a final blow, a dagger thrown across the table. Ryan's head turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers with a look so piercing the entire studio seemed to fall into a hush. His voice, when it came, was soft, but it cut deeper than any shout could have. "Sara, you don't know me. You've decided what's true about me because it fits the story you want to tell. But truth doesn't belong to you, and it doesn't belong to me either. It belongs to everyone watching. And maybe they'll decide who's hiding and who's not. I don't need to convince you." The audience erupted, cheers that shook the walls, whistles that echoed, shouts of "that's right," filling the air. It was the loudest ovation of the day, and Sara's lips pressed together, her face flickering with something that looked like defeat, or perhaps just exhaustion. The producers, sensing the battle had reached its end, moved swiftly to steer the show back to safer waters. Whoopi leaned in, forcing a smile. "All right, that's all the time we've got for this segment. Ryan, thank you for being here. Everyone, make sure you check out his new film." But her words were drowned out by the audience still clapping, still buzzing with adrenaline. Ryan offered a polite nod, but his eyes betrayed the weight of what had just unfolded. Sara sat silently, refusing to look at him, her jaw clenched tight. When the cameras finally cut, the studio erupted into chaos once more. Audience members shouted at Sara, others defended her, and a handful even attempted to rush toward the stage before security intervened. The energy was volatile, unpredictable, as though the walls of the studio could barely contain it. Outside, the fallout began immediately. Clips of the confrontation flooded social media within minutes. Hashtags like #Ryan vs. Sara, #The View Meltdown, and #Gosling Unfiltered began trending worldwide. Twitter was ablaze with debates. Some hailed Sara as a fearless truth-teller who had dared to pierce the Hollywood facade, while others accused her of bullying, of crossing a line, of ambushing a guest in the name of spectacle. TikTok users cut the footage into dramatic edits, replaying Ryan's quiet fury against Sara's sharp accusations. Instagram reels spread like wildfire, with captions like, "Ryan Gosling destroys Sara Haines' live," or "Sara Haines stands up to Hollywood illusion." News outlets scrambled to capture the frenzy, headlines appearing within the hour. Ryan Gosling explodes on The View, audience stunned. Sara Haines accuses Gosling of hiding behind Hollywood image. Television history. The day The View became a battlefield. Commentators weighed in on morning radio, podcasts, even late-night comedy shows. The debate had already left the studio, consuming every corner of the internet. Meanwhile, Ryan was seen leaving the building through a side exit, his face tight, his steps brisk, ignoring the swarm of paparazzi shouting questions. Sara exited hours later, flanked by producers, her chin high but her silence deafening. In living rooms across America, viewers sat stunned. Some replayed the confrontation on DVR, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others took to social media, typing furiously into the digital void, choosing sides, defending, condemning. The clash had struck a nerve that went far beyond Ryan Gosling or Sara Haines. It had exposed a fault line in how people viewed fame, privacy, and accountability. And the question echoed everywhere. Who was right? Ryan Gosling, the man who guarded his personal life with ferocity, who insisted that privacy was not dishonesty. Or Sara Haines, the host who believed that vulnerability meant showing the cracks, even if it meant breaking someone open on live television. The fallout wasn't just about two people. It was about the public itself, its hunger for truth, its appetite for spectacle, and its divided definitions of honesty. In the days that followed, the clip racked up millions of views. Think pieces appeared in magazines and online journals, dissecting every word, every glance, every tremor of emotion between Ryan and Sara. The confrontation became more than an argument. It became a cultural moment, the kind that lingers long after the cameras stop rolling. And through it all, the tension lingered. Ryan never issued a statement, choosing silence over explanation. Sara, in contrast, doubled down on air the next morning, insisting she had only done her job, only asked the questions people were afraid to ask. The hosts tread lightly around her, the memory of the storm still too fresh to ignore. The View's ratings spiked, the segment replayed endlessly, the confrontation cemented in television history. But for those who had been there in the studio, who had felt the air tighten, who had heard the gasps and cheers, the memory was sharper, heavier. It wasn't just an argument. It was a battle of wills, a tearing open of the fragile boundary between image and identity. And maybe, just maybe, it was the day daytime television proved it could be as explosive, as unfiltered, as any cinematic drama. Now the question is yours. Was Sara Haines right to press Ryan Gosling, to demand vulnerability, to strip away the image and force the cracks into the light? Or was Ryan right to defend his boundaries, to call out the hunger for spectacle disguised as truth? The debate rages on. And it doesn't end here. Tell me what you think. Whose side are you on? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, more explosive showdowns that reveal the raw, unfiltered heart of fame and conflict, make sure you subscribe to Prime Narrator, hit that like button, and share this with someone who needs to see it. Because this was not just an interview. This was a moment. And moments like this, you'll only find here.